If your mixes still feel off no matter what you do, then this video is going to help. I'm walking through the exact 7 tips that made my mixes immediately improve, which you can apply right away to hear great results overnight. Let's get into it. Tip number 1, reference like a pro. This one gets said a lot, but how you do it makes all the difference. I used to just throw in a reference track just to A/B the loudness and overall vibe of the track, but now I go a bit deeper. Now I'll listen critically to the vocal placement relative to the instrumental, along with the stereo width, transient response, and low-end impact, and pick apart all my favorite elements from my reference track to implement any of that stuff that I like onto my mix. Now, I'm not saying it has to be exactly identical because no 2 songs are the same, but when you start listening to your reference track like you're trying to reverse engineer it, your brain starts to catch nuanced details that you used to miss. This can also spark new ideas on how you can creatively implement special effects into your mix, or even go deeper and use tools that you are already using like reverb and delay in a completely unique way. Tip number 2, fix the mix before the mix. Now, if you're working with client vocals that were sent to you, you don't always have the luxury of re-recording vocals. But if you're recording the vocals yourself, you've got more control. You can re-record a bad take, fix a noisy room, or readjust your microphone placement, which can make or break the vocal sound in your mix. When I first started engineering in the very beginning, I used to try and save bad recordings in the mix. I would over EQ harshness or muddy tones, stack noise gates on top of each other, and ignore background noises in takes like coughs, sneezes, dogs barking, chairs squeaking, etc., instead of re-recording, making sure I got the right take before I started mixing. Now whenever I'm recording, I spend way more time making sure that each take that I have is a quality take, and fixing things in the playlist before touching a single plugin. Clean edits with nice fades, proper gain staging, and making sure your takes are on time with your session before adding any EQ or compression makes your plugins work with you instead of against you. Again, helping you achieve that great sounding mix. Tip number 3, knowing when to process individually versus in groups. One of the best workflow upgrades I made was learning when to do individual processing versus group processing. The trick here is knowing what to solve and when to solve it. For example, let's say I have 2 lead tracks, 1 ad-lib track, and 1 double track, and all of those are being routed into a vocal bus. If I want to filter the ad-libs, low cut the double takes, or tweak the leads individually, I can do that all on their own separate tracks. But once I've shaped each individual track how I like, I then process them together on the vocal bus to make sure they all blend together as one unit. This same idea goes for drums, guitars, synths, pianos, you name it, which will give you more control and unity within your mix. I know, this is a lot of information to keep track of, but before we move on, if you're an artist or producer who's more focused on the process of creating music versus engineering it, then let me take the mixing and mastering off of your hands so you can focus on what really matters, creating more music. So if that's what you're looking for, then click the first link in the description down below to fill out a mix request form to get your music professionally mixed and mastered today. Now back to the video. Tip number 4, learning how to achieve true loudness. Again, in the very beginning of my mixing career, I used to think that in order to achieve a loud song, I had to do that in the mastering stage, which led me to throw on a final master limiter at the end of my mix, expecting for it to do all the work. And the result that I got was a mix that sounded squashed to hell, with flat dynamics, harshness, and a lot of pumping because I was pushing my mix into the limiter way too hard. All of that and my songs still didn't sound as loud or impactful as other commercial records. Then I learned that true loudness is achieved in the mix. You have to shape your transients and control dynamics early on so things don't spike unpredictably or trigger your limiter unnecessarily. Now every time I'm mixing, I make sure that I utilize tools like saturation and clipping to help me trim the right amount of transient energy and control my peaks before it hits my final limiter. I'll also use saturation whenever I want to bring presence and harmonics to a sound, making it feel louder without increasing the peak signal. This will help you a lot because once you focus on achieving loudness in the mix under the hood, your limiter will become a safety net, giving you that little extra power within your mixes without overdoing it being a complete crutch for your lack of loudness. Tip number 5, mix at appropriate volumes. Instead of always mixing loud or always mixing quiet, I started mixing mixing at appropriate volumes. And what this basically means is that I think like the listener. I start to think of where this track is going to be played. If it's a club record, I'll do a lot of balancing slightly louder so I can hear how the song feels like really loud. And if it's a more laid back R&B track, I'll usually mix it in a more mid to low volume range. Matching the monitoring level to my song's environment helped me make sure my mixing decisions actually translate. I will still check my mixes at a very low volume briefly just to hear if anything disappears or pokes out, but I don't usually stay there too long. I just normally do that as a secondary spot check without overthinking. Tip number 6, simplify your plugin chain. Again, in the very beginning of my career, I thought that I needed a lot of plugins to achieve a great sound. I would stack plugins like crazy. I would have an EQ into a compressor, into another EQ, into another compressor, into a de-esser, into a reverb, into a saturator, into a multiband compressor, and half of that wasn't even helping. But one thing that I quickly learned was that the more plugins that you stack, the more you actually start to degrade your original sound. Every single plugin you add to your mix adds something. Phase shifts, artifacts, saturation, even slight tone changes. And it's not always obvious at first, but after 5, 6, 7, 8 plugins, you're completely messing up and degrading the quality of your audio signal. And unless I'm looking to achieve something very specific, I'll typically process my mixes more like a minimalist. Everything I do now is with pure intent. I'll ask myself before I throw on a plugin, what am I actually trying to fix or enhance here? I don't really stack plugins mindlessly anymore. I use each one with a specific goal in mind. If you have a cleaner chain, you'll have a cleaner sound. Now, take this tip with a grain of salt because maybe you do want something that sounds overly processed. Almost everything in music boils down to taste, so if you want to do that, go ahead. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But purposeful processing over plugin clutter keeps your mix super focused, which allows you to stay closer to the original emotion of the performance. And tip number 7, don't overthink, just mix. One of the biggest improvements in my mixing came when I stopped overthinking. I used to spend hours on a mix tweaking tiny details, second guessing every single move, and it left me more frustrated more often than not. But when I started trusting my ears and flowing through the mix without obsessing, I actually started to make better decisions much quicker. And if something wasn't sounding right, I'd know how to fix it much faster by stepping away and coming back to the mix with fresh ears, which helped me be more objective when mixing overall. One thing I also like to do personally is split my mixing into 2 different modes. I'll have a practice mode and a performance mode in my head. Whenever I have free time to practice, I'll open up an old session and play with plugins, experimenting with weird chains to learn more about what my plugins could actually do, without worrying about achieving a specific result. But whenever I'm in performance mode, which is typically when I'm working with a client, I'll then apply everything I learned from my practicing mode to achieve the sound that I want quickly. It's important to not get stuck trying to make every session a masterpiece. Just keep mixing, move forward, and trust that you will improve with more mixing repetitions. If this video helped you at all, drop a like and let me know which tip helped you the most, and feel free to add any tips that have helped you along within your mixing journey. And don't forget to subscribe if you're serious about getting better at mixing and mastering, because I have more videos coming within the near future. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.